Iranians woken to a country in turmoil, with Iran's political establishment shaken with the shock resignation of the country's foreign minister, Javad Zarif. But it's not up to Zarif if he can quit. Now President Hassan Rouhani saying he won't allow it. As the lead negotiator in the 2015 nuclear deal, speculation his sudden offer to step down came due to pressure from hardline elements unhappy with his role in it. In an interview with the Islamic Republic Party's newspaper, Jamhuri Islami, pointing to that view, with Zarif saying the deadly poison for foreign policy is for foreign policy to become an issue of party and factional fighting. Now, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu quick to welcome the news. He's tweeted, "Zarif is gone, good riddance." Now, joining me in studio, Middle East correspondent Emily Rose and Iran expert Meir Javedanfar. Emily, Netanyahu saying to the effect of good riddance, but it seems that's not the way it's going.
Well, nothing is confirmed yet, and we don't know really what will happen if Zarif will be forced to officially step down now. But one thing is for sure about these two adversaries: they have taken shots at each other and have used social media as the opportunity to take shots at each other openly and publicly, and this is definitely Netanyahu's opportunity to take that shot online.
All right. Now, let's also take a look at what US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo tweeted in the wake of the resignation. He wrote, "We note Zarif's resignation. We'll see if it sticks. Either way, he and Hassan Rouhani are just frontmen for a corrupt religious mafia. We know Khamenei makes all the final decisions." So, Meir, as we're seeing, it seems that it's not very clear if Zarif will stand down, is able to stand down, what's actually happening behind the scenes. If Khamenei is calling all the shots here, if it's up to him, then why are we hearing that Rouhani is not letting Zarif stand down?
Well, Khamenei, in Iran, according to the constitution, it's the president who nominates the foreign minister and the parliament approves him or not. But in reality, we know that there are four ministers within the cabinet that are choices of the supreme leader first, and then the president. And one of them is the Minister of Foreign Affairs. And the fact that Zarif has taken this decision, the only person who could really reverse it, perhaps, could be Khamenei himself. But I think it's a vote of confidence for Zarif that Rouhani comes and says, "I don't want him to go." Maybe it's a sign that they are patching things up. There are some unconfirmed reports from Iran. But for now, I think this shows that there is a very strong argument going on within Iranian politics.
Yeah, you say talking about perhaps patching things up. So, Emily, talk us through the timing, because, of course, this resignation or attempted resignation comes just hours after a surprise visit by Syrian President Bashar Assad to Tehran.
Yes, there were reports that the optics of that visit were what sparked Zarif to submit his resignation. But we also know that Zarif ended up being, in the face of the Iranian public and even in the world, he ended up being the face of the JCPOA, the nuclear agreement, which was in the works. And we know recently US President Donald Trump decided to reimpose sanctions on Iran in the wake of withdrawing from that agreement, saying that it wasn't worth the paper that it was written on. And in the wake of that, European countries, Germany, France, the UK, decided to launch an effort to try to revive that agreement. They found a conduit, a separate way to try to channel funds and do deals with Iran, and that's all in the working, and Zarif is part of the works behind it. It's kind of being stalled. Either way, that deal is also being seen as not popular to the Iranian public, because after the United States pulled out, the Iranian public also pulled its support out with it, saying, oh, it was a bad idea to do deals with the United States. They've decided to withdraw. And it could be that Zarif's resignation is a mark that he's going to go down with that ship, also with the JCPOA, and it looks as though it also puts that deal at risk of crumbling to the ground, could be the nail in the coffin of that deal, in fact.
Do you see this as undermining that deal?
I think what could undermine it is if the Supreme Leader decides to walk away because the Europeans don't want to deal with Iran at all. But I am not so sure. I mean, he was hurt, certainly. It was a very, very deep wound, because Zarif and Rouhani invested so much of the political capital in the Iran deal, and Trump pulled it away. But I think, look, the Iranian regime is in a bind, because on the one hand, it got you know, he got tricked. You know, the Americans were dishonest. They pulled out of a deal that the Iranians were abiding to. But on the other hand, the Iranians know, okay, playing the victim is not going to help here, because if we withdraw from the deal, then the Europeans are not going to do business with us, and the situation is going to be even worse. What I think is that there's a lot of infighting in Iran between the regime and the government, the unelected regime versus the government. You know, if you're a project manager, in my previous life, I was a certified project manager when I, you know, before I started doing what I'm doing, and thank God I made the change. You know that you should never accept a project where you have all the responsibility but not all the authority. And being a president in Iran, a foreign minister, you have all the responsibility when things go back, but you don't have the authority. And I think him and Rouhani are under a mountain of pressure. And I think this was one of the symptoms of, on the one hand, pressure from Trump, and on the other hand, pressure from the regime, which was doing whatever it wanted. On the one hand, Zarif is trying to improve relations with Europe. On the other hand, the regime is planning terror operations in Europe. You know, on the one hand, Iran is trying to attract investment from Europe. On the other hand, the regime is investing dual Iranian European citizens, scaring the bejesus out of any Iranian or European who wants to invest in Iran. So, you know, this has created... This is an ongoing struggle, and this is one of the symptoms.
So then, as you've pointed to, hardline voices have been getting louder inside Iran. So, Emily, why would then Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu be welcoming the resignation, knowing that it could signal a shift towards more hawkish leadership in Iran?
Well, Netanyahu was never necessarily a large proponent or supporter of any kind of regime in Iran, even with Rouhani, who is seen as a moderate on the Iranian scale. The Obama administration, senior members of the Obama administration were actually quite supportive of the move of the country moving towards what they saw as a more moderate person like Rouhani. Well, Netanyahu was never behind it. He always said that he never bought that, and that Iran was still going to stick to its terror-supporting ways around the world. And a move that is showing a weakness in Iran, or any kind of shift in the Iranian spectrum, political spectrum, I'll bet that Netanyahu is always going to throw his support behind that, because this is his opportunity also to garner political points back home. And let's not forget that he's facing an election coming up the pike.
Look, Zarif could sell ice to the Eskimos. This was the concern, that he was such a good diplomat and he spoke such good English, something which we haven't had in Israel for a long time. And this was really bothering the government of Israel. And despite the fact that he was lying on many occasions and he, you know, beautified the regime's crimes, people listened to Zarif. They listened to him more than any other serving Iranian foreign minister. But on the big picture, let's be honest, Israel does not want the current regime. Israel believes that the current regime is not reformable. You could say yes, you could say no. So it doesn't matter if it's hardline or reformist. Israel doesn't care.